Welcome to this journey into one of the most disturbing and unresolved mysteries of the American South. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching this from, and what time is it right now? Drop a comment below. There's something about exploring these dark stories together, no matter where we are in the world, that connects us to the past in ways we can't quite explain. This is a story about fire, secrets, and a night that changed everything. October 14th, 1888, Wilkes County, Georgia. The remnants of the Civil War still lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The South was rebuilding, reimagining itself in the aftermath of abolition, but old wounds ran deep. In the rural stretches of Georgia, grand estates stood as monuments to a fading era, their white columns casting long shadows over fields that had once been worked by enslaved hands. The Thornhill Estate was one such place. A sprawling property owned by the Ashford family, it sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by dense pine forests and cotton fields that stretched toward the horizon. The main house was a three-story Georgian mansion, its paint peeling slightly, but still imposing, still dignified. Inside lived Edmund Ashford, a 52-year-old widower who had lost his wife to typhoid fever 5 years prior. With him were his 3 children, Caroline, 24, the eldest daughter known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue; Thomas, 21, a quiet young man who preferred books to people; and Margot, 19, the beauty of the family, engaged to be married the following spring. And then there was Martha Clemmons. Martha was 28 years old, a black woman who had been hired as the housemaid 3 years earlier, in 1885. She had come with impeccable references from a family in Augusta, and the Ashfords had considered themselves fortunate to secure her services. She was efficient, quiet, and kept to herself. She slept in a small room off the kitchen, rose before dawn, and retired long after the family had gone to bed. By all accounts, she was the perfect employee. But on the morning of October 15th, 1888, everything changed. The Thornhill Estate was gone, reduced to ash and charred timber. The fire had started sometime after midnight, consuming the mansion with such ferocity that neighbors 3 miles away woke to the orange glow on the horizon. By the time help arrived, there was nothing left to save. The roof had collapsed inward. The walls had crumbled. The heat had been so intense that the grand piano in the parlor had melted into a twisted sculpture of metal and ivory. And the family? Edmund Ashford, Caroline, Thomas, and Margot were all found dead in their beds. They had died from smoke inhalation, the coroner would later determine. They never woke up. They never had a chance. Martha Clemmons was discovered at dawn, wandering through the cotton fields 1/2 mile from the ruins. Her dress was singed. Her hands were blistered with minor burns. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but she was alive. When the sheriff approached her, she didn't speak. She didn't scream. She simply stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, her lips moving silently as if reciting something only she could hear. It would be 3 days before she uttered a single word. The official investigation concluded that the fire had been an accident, a knocked-over oil lamp perhaps, a spark from the kitchen stove. These things happened, especially in old wooden houses. But the people of Wilkes County weren't convinced. Whispers began almost immediately. Why had Martha survived when no one else had? Why had she been found so far from the house? And why, in the days leading up to the fire, had members of the Ashford family seemed terrified of their own housemaid? A local shopkeeper reported that Carolyn Ashford had come to town 4 days before the fire, visibly shaken, asking if anyone knew of a priest or a spiritualist. A neighbor claimed to have seen strange lights flickering in the attic windows late at night, though the attic had been sealed shut for years. And Thomas Ashford had allegedly told a friend that Martha had been talking to someone who wasn't there while she worked in the kitchen. But what they found in Martha's apron pocket would change everything. To understand what happened at the Thornhill Estate, we need to understand the world it existed in. The year 1888 was a complicated time in the American South, particularly in Georgia. The Civil War had ended 23 years earlier, but its ghosts still walked among the living. The abolition of slavery in 1865 had fundamentally changed the social and economic structure of the South. Families like the Ashfords, who had once relied on enslaved labor to maintain their estates, now found themselves in a precarious position. They still owned land, still held onto their wealth and status, but the power dynamic had shifted. Former slaves were now freedmen and freedwomen, legally entitled to wages, to mobility, to lives of their own choosing. But legal freedom and social acceptance were two very different things. Wilkes County was located in the northeastern part of Georgia, an area known for its cotton production and its deeply entrenched racial hierarchies. The period known as Reconstruction had officially ended in 1877, and what followed was an era of increasing violence and intimidation toward black citizens. The Ku Klux Klan was active in the region. Lynchings were not uncommon. Jim Crow laws were being established, codifying segregation and disenfranchisement. It was a time of tension, fear, and profound injustice. The Ashford family had managed to maintain their estate through a combination of tenant farming and hired labor. According to county records, Edmund Ashford employed several black workers on his land, paying them meager wages to cultivate cotton and maintain the property. But inside the main house, there was only one employee, Martha Clemmons. Historical documents paint a picture of Edmund Ashford as a man struggling to preserve his family's legacy. His wife, Elizabeth, had died in 1883, leaving him to raise 3 headstrong children alone. He was described in local newspaper archives as a gentleman of the old school, dignified but withdrawn. Neighbors recalled that he rarely left the estate, preferring to spend his days managing the property from his study, poring over ledgers and correspondence. Caroline Ashford, the eldest daughter, had received an education uncommon for women of her time. She had attended a finishing school in Savannah and was known for her love of literature and her outspoken nature. A letter she wrote to a friend in Atlanta, dated June 1888, has been preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives. In it, she wrote, "Father grows more melancholy with each passing month. The house feels heavy, as if the walls themselves are mourning. Sometimes I wake in the night and feel as though we are not alone, though I know that is foolish." Thomas Ashford was the quiet one, the scholar. He had intended to study at the University of Georgia, but had abandoned those plans after his mother's death to help his father manage the estate. According to a diary entry found years later, Thomas felt trapped by his family obligations, writing, "I am a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by fields I never wished to inherit, and a future I never chose." Margot, the youngest, was engaged to marry a man named William Hartwell, the son of a wealthy merchant from Augusta. The wedding was planned for April 1889. Margot was described by those who knew her as vivacious and charming, though prone to nervous episodes. A seamstress in town recalled that Margot had come for a dress fitting in early October 1888, just days before the fire, and had seemed distracted and frightened, jumping at every sound. And then there was Martha. Very little is known about Martha Clemmons before she arrived at the Thornhill Estate in 1885. Census records indicate she was born in South Carolina around 1860, which would have made her a child during the final years of slavery. Whether she had been born enslaved or free is unclear. The records are incomplete. What we do know is that she had worked for a family named Mercer in Augusta, Georgia, and had left their employment under circumstances that were never fully explained. The Ashfords hired her based on a written recommendation from Mrs. Eleanor Mercer, dated March 1885. The letter, which survives in the estate's archived paperwork, is brief and strangely formal. Martha Clemmons is a capable housemaid. She is clean, punctual, and obedient. I release her from service with no reservations. There is something about the phrasing, "I release her," that feels odd, almost ominous, as if Martha had been bound to the Mercers by something more than just employment. For 3 years, Martha worked at the Thornhill Estate without incident. She cooked, cleaned, and maintained the household with quiet efficiency. She attended the local Black Baptist church on Sundays, though the pastor later testified that she always sat alone and never spoke to other congregants. She was like a shadow, he said, present but not quite there. The people of Wilkes County lived in a world of rigid boundaries, black and white, rich and poor, past and present. The old order was crumbling, but it hadn't fallen yet. And in houses like the Thornhill Estate, where the past and present collided, where former slaves now worked as paid employees in the homes of former masters, tensions simmered just beneath the surface. It was a world where anything could happen, where old hatreds could ignite like dry kindling, where secrets buried in the past could claw their way back to the surface. And in October 1888, something did. The fire that consumed the Thornhill Estate didn't just destroy a building, it exposed fractures that had been forming for years, hidden beneath layers of civility and silence. What happened on the night of October 14th would force the people of Wilkes County to confront questions they had been avoiding. What did the Ashford family know about their housemaid? What had they discovered in the weeks leading up to the fire? And what had Martha Clemmons been hiding? The answers, as we'll see, are more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came on October 8th, 1888, 6 days before the fire. According to testimony given by a farmhand named Samuel Cooper, who worked on the Ashford property, he was repairing a fence near the main house when he heard shouting from inside. It was mid-afternoon, an unusual time for raised voices in a household that prided itself on decorum. Samuel couldn't make out the exact words, but he recognized the voices. Edmund Ashford and his daughter Caroline were arguing. What struck him as particularly strange was that he also heard a third voice, calm, measured, and distinctly female, Martha's voice. "I never heard her speak more than a few words at a time," Samuel later told the sheriff, "but that day it was like she was giving orders. And the master and Miss Caroline, they sounded afraid." When questioned further, Samuel admitted he had peered through a window. What he saw stayed with him for the rest of his life. Martha standing in the center of the parlor, perfectly still, while Edmund and Caroline backed away from her. "It wasn't natural," he said, "the way she stood there, not moving, not even blinking, and the way they looked at her, like she was something that might strike at any moment." That same evening, Carolyn Ashford visited the home of Reverend Howard Pierce, the pastor of the local White Presbyterian Church. The Reverend's personal journal, discovered in 1961 and now housed at the Georgia Historical Society, contains an entry dated October 8th, 1888. "Caroline, Ashford came to me this evening in a state of great distress. She would not speak plainly of what troubled her, but asked repeatedly if I knew of any priest versed in matters of spiritual affliction. When I pressed her to explain, she became agitated and said only, 'She is not what she appears to be. There is something in her that does not belong.' I attempted to offer counsel and prayer, but Caroline refused and left abruptly. I fear for that family." The following day, October 9th, Thomas Ashford was seen in the town of Washington, the county seat, speaking with Dr. Albert Grayson, the local physician. A witness in the general store overheard parts of their conversation. Thomas had asked the doctor if there were any asylums in Georgia that specialized in treating women afflicted with spiritual delusions. When Dr. Grayson asked if someone in the household was unwell, Thomas allegedly replied, "It's not illness, it's something else, something we don't understand." But the most chilling account comes from October 11th, 3 days before the fire. Margot Ashford, the youngest daughter, went to visit her fiancé William Hartwell in Augusta. She arrived unannounced, disheveled, and in tears. William's sister, Ruth Hartwell, later provided a sworn statement describing Margot's condition. She was beside herself with fear. She kept saying that Martha had been going to the attic at night, that they could hear her walking above their bedrooms, though the attic had been locked. And for years, she said Martha had told her something dreadful, something about the house having a debt to pay. Ruth asked Margot what she meant by a debt, but Margot refused to elaborate. She stayed in Augusta for one night, then insisted on returning home despite William's protests. "I cannot leave them alone with her," Margot said. "If something happens and I'm not there, I'll never forgive myself." 4 days later, the Thornhill Estate burned to the ground and Margot Ashford died in her bed. The official investigation began on the morning of October 15th, led by Sheriff Thomas Abernathy, a practical man with little patience for superstition. His report, filed on October 22, 1888, is preserved in the Wilkes County Courthouse archives. It reads, in part, "Upon inspection of the ruins, I determined the fire originated in the kitchen area. The intensity of the blaze suggests the use of an accelerant, though no definitive evidence could be recovered due to the complete destruction of the structure. All 4 members of the Ashford family perished from smoke inhalation. They were found in their respective bedrooms on the 2nd floor. There were no signs of struggle or forced entry. The housemaid, Martha Clemmons, was discovered alive in the fields. She bore minor burns and showed signs of shock. When questioned, she remained mute. But Sheriff Abernathy's report left out several crucial details that would only come to light years later through witness statements and letters. First, when Martha was found in the fields, she was clutching something in her burned hands. A key, not just any key, but the key to the attic, which had supposedly been lost years ago after Elizabeth Ashford's death. Second, when the bodies of the Ashford family were examined, the coroner noted something peculiar. All 4 had died from smoke inhalation, yes, but their bedroom doors had been locked from the outside. The keys were never found. Third, in the pocket of Martha's apron, investigators discovered a piece of paper, partially burned but still legible. On it was written a single line in elegant handwriting that did not match Martha's. "The door is open. They can come through now." The people of Wilkes County demanded answers. How had the fire started? Why had Martha survived? And most urgently, had she murdered the Ashford family? Martha was taken into custody and placed in a cell at the county jail. For 3 days, she remained silent, staring at the walls, her lips moving soundlessly. The local newspaper, the Wilkes County Courier, ran a headline on October 18th. "Negro housemaid suspected in estate fire. Family of 4 perishes while she escapes." On the evening of October 18th, Martha finally spoke. The jailer, a man named Daniel Foster, was making his rounds when he heard her voice. He described it as wrong somehow, like 2 voices speaking at once. Martha was standing at the bars of her cell, and when she saw him, she said, "I tried to stop them. I held the door closed as long as I could, but they were so strong, they wanted to come back." When Daniel asked who they were, Martha smiled, a terrible, empty smile, and said nothing more. The next morning, October 19th, Martha was found kneeling in her cell. She had used a piece of charcoal from the stove to write on the wall. The message was brief, written in shaky letters. "They made me open the door." That evening, something happened that has never been fully explained. A fire broke. Out in the jail, small, contained to Martha's cell area, quickly extinguished. In the chaos and smoke, Martha Clemmons disappeared. She was never seen again. Tell us in the comments what you think is happening so far. Was Martha a victim or a perpetrator? Was this murder or was something else at play? Share your theories below. We want to hear what you think. After Martha's escape, Sheriff Abernathy ordered a more thorough examination of what remained of the Thornhill Estate. What his deputies, found in the ruins, would haunt the investigation for decades to come. The first discovery was made on October 21st, 1888, 2 days after Martha's disappearance. Deputy James Whitlock was sifting through the charred remains of the kitchen when he uncovered a metal box buried beneath fallen timbers. The box was badly damaged but intact, its contents protected from the flames. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in various hands, dating back to 1885, the year Martha had arrived at the Wilkes Estate. Most of the letters were mundane correspondence between Edmund Ashford and various business associates. But 3 letters stood out, and they painted a disturbing picture. The first was from Eleanor Mercer, the woman who had employed Martha before the Ashfords. It was dated February 1885, 2 months before Martha came to Thornhill Estate. Unlike the formal recommendation Mrs. Mercer had provided, this letter was personal and desperate. Edmund, I must warn you against the woman you are. Considering for employment, Martha Clemmons came to us with the highest references, and for 2 years she served admirably. But in recent months, something has changed. She speaks to empty rooms. Objects move in her presence. My husband has forbidden her from entering certain parts of the house after we discovered her in the cellar at midnight, standing before the old slave quarters foundation, her hands pressed against the stones, as if listening for something beneath. I beg you to reconsider this hire. There is something in her that I cannot name, but I fear it desperately. Edmund had apparently ignored this warning. But why? A second letter, this one from Edmund to an unknown recipient, dated March 1885, provided a clue. The woman comes highly recommended despite Eleanor's superstitious concerns. More importantly, she has agreed to work for significantly less than the previous housemaid, and she requires no days off except Sundays. In our current financial circumstances, I cannot afford to be particular. The estate hemorrhages money. If I cannot reduce expenses soon, we will lose everything father built. So Edmund had known. He had known Martha might be dangerous, but his desperate financial situation had outweighed his caution. He had brought her into his home, into his children's lives, to save money. The third letter was the most disturbing. It was written by Caroline Ashford, addressed to no one, dated October 7th, 1888, 1 week before the fire. The paper was water-stained, the ink smudged, as if Caroline had been crying while she wrote, I saw her tonight. Not Martha, but what wears Martha's face. I went down to the kitchen for water and found her standing in the darkness, perfectly still, her eyes open but unseeing. I spoke her name and she turned to me, and I swear to God there was nothing human in her gaze. She smiled and said, They're almost ready to come home, Miss Caroline. The door is almost open. Your mother is waiting on the other side. I fled back to my room and locked the door. How does she know about Mother? How does she know what we did? What did they do? That question would lead investigators to the second major discovery. On October 24th, 1888, workers clearing debris from the collapsed second floor uncovered the remains of a diary. It was badly burned, with most pages reduced to ash, but several fragments were legible. The handwriting was identified as belonging to Elizabeth Ashford, Edmund's deceased wife. The diary fragments were dated from 1882 to 1883, the years leading up to Elizabeth's death. The entries that survived painted a portrait of a woman consumed by guilt and fear. August 12th, 1882. I cannot sleep. The dreams are getting worse. I see them all, the ones who worked these fields, the ones who lived in the quarters before Father tore them down. They stand at the edge of the tree line and watch the house. Edmund says it is grief and exhaustion, but I know what I see. They are waiting for something. November 3rd, 1882. I went to the old foundation where the quarters once stood. Edmund's father had them burned after the war ended, wanting to erase all evidence of what this place had been. But you can still see the stones, still smell the ash in the soil. I stood there and felt such overwhelming sorrow that I collapsed. When Edmund found me, I was weeping uncontrollably. I told him we must leave this place, that the land will not forgive us. He thinks I am going mad. March 17th, 1883. I did something unforgivable. God help me, I was desperate to make the dreams stop, to appease whatever haunts this land. I went to a woman in town, a freedwoman who knows the old ways. She told me that land soaked in suffering does not forget. She said the only way to close the door between worlds is to seal it with a willing guardian, someone who would stand watch and keep the past from returning. I asked her how one finds such a guardian. She smiled and said, "You don't find them. They find you." The final entry, dated April 2nd, 1883, just weeks before Elizabeth's death. She is coming. I saw her in a dream, a woman with kind eyes and a terrible purpose. She will work in this house. She will wait. And when the time is right, when the door has weakened enough, she will open it and let them through. I tried to warn Edmund, but he won't listen. I am dying, I can feel it, and I am afraid of what will happen when I am gone. The door needs a guardian. But what if the guardian becomes the key? Elizabeth Ashford died of typhoid fever on May 8th, 1883. 2 years later, Martha Clemmons arrived at the Thornhill Estate. The investigation took an even darker turn when deputies finally gained access to the attic. The attic had been sealed since Elizabeth Ashford's death, or so the family had claimed. Edmund had told neighbours that his late wife had spent her final days in an attic room, and after she passed, he had locked it as a shrine to her memory. No one was to enter. The key had been lost, but Martha had that key. She had been found clutching it in the fields on the morning after the fire. On October 26th, 1888, Sheriff Abernathy and 3 deputies used axes to break through the attic door, which had been nailed shut in addition to being locked. What they found inside defied explanation. The attic room was largely untouched by the fire, protected by thick brick walls and a slate roof that had collapsed inward but sealed the space rather than exposing it. The room was small, perhaps 12 feet by 12 feet, with a single window that had been painted black from the inside. The walls were covered in writing, not just writing, symbols, diagrams, prayers, warnings, hundreds of them written in multiple hands and multiple languages. Some were in English, others in what appeared to be African languages or dialects. Later analysis would identify fragments of Gula, Yoruba, and Haitian Creole, languages associated with enslaved peoples and their descendants. One wall contained a list of names written in careful script, 37 names, all of them unfamiliar to the investigators. Beneath each name was a date, ranging from 1823 to 1861. Next to each date was a single word: gone. Historical research conducted in the 1960s would reveal that these were the names of enslaved people who had lived and died on the Ashford property before the Civil War. The dates corresponded to their deaths. Some had died of disease, others had died under circumstances that were never recorded. Their bodies had been buried in unmarked graves somewhere on the property, graves that had been ploughed over and forgotten after abolition. But someone had remembered. Someone had written their names on the attic wall, preserving them when history had tried to erase them, and someone had been calling to them. In the center of the room stood a small table, and on that table sat a bowl filled with ash, salt, and what appeared to be bone fragments. Surrounding the bowl were objects: a lock of grey hair, a rusted shackle, a child's wooden doll with one eye missing, and a daguerreotype photograph of a black woman. Not Martha, but someone who looked hauntingly similar. On the floor, drawn in white chalk, was a circle approximately 6 feet in diameter. Inside the circle were more symbols, including one that several deputies recognized from their church upbringing, an inverted cross. But the most disturbing element was what hung from the ceiling. Suspended on thin wires were dozens of small cloth pouches, the kind used in folk magic practices, sometimes called mojo bags or conjure bags. When cut down and opened, each pouch was found to contain personal items: a button from Edmund's jacket, strands of Caroline's hair, a page torn from Thomas's book, a piece of lace from Margot's wedding dress, and a photograph of Elizabeth Ashford with the eyes scratched out. Deputy Whitlock, who had accompanied Sheriff Abernathy into the attic, later testified at a town council meeting about what he experienced in that room. "I'm not a superstitious man, but I'll tell you this: that room felt wrong. The temperature was at least 20 degrees colder than the rest of the house, even though it should have been the warmest place, being directly under the roof. And there was a smell, not smoke or ash, but something rotten and sweet, like flowers on a grave. When we tried to remove the items from the room, 2 of us became violently ill. Sheriff Abernathy ordered the attic sealed again, and it was done the same day. But before it was sealed, Sheriff Abernathy discovered one final piece of evidence: a journal, hidden beneath the floorboards. The journal was not burned. It was pristine, as if it had been protected by something more than wood and nails. The handwriting inside did not match any known sample from the Ashford family or their employees. It was neat, precise, and deeply unsettling. The entries began in March 1885, the month Martha arrived at the estate. Day 1. I have entered the house. They do not know what I am. They see a woman who will scrub their floors and cook their meals. They do not see the door I carry inside me. Day 47. I found the room tonight. Elizabeth prepared it well before she died. All the names are here, all the forgotten. I have begun the calls. Day 298. Thomas heard me last night. He stood outside the attic door and listened. I know he wanted to open it, but he is afraid. Good. Fear keeps them compliant. Day 891. Caroline saw me tonight in the kitchen. Not me, but what speaks through me. She finally understands. They all will soon. The final entry was dated October 14th, 1888, the night of the fire. Tonight the door opens. Tonight they come home. I am sorry for the ones who will burn, but the debt must be paid in full. 37 souls were taken from this land. 37 souls will be returned. The fire will cleanse, the fire will transform, and I will walk away because I am not the punishment. I am only the key. But the carvings on the cellar door match symbols found in only one other place, a place that would lead investigators down a path they could never have anticipated. The cellar door symbols led investigators to search the foundation of the house more carefully. On November 3rd, 1888, workers excavating the ruins to prepare the land for sale made a discovery that would haunt Wilkes County for generations. Beneath the collapsed kitchen floor, they found a hidden cellar. Not the main cellar that the family had used for storage, but a secondary space, older and deliberately concealed. The entrance had been covered by heavy stones and mortar, suggesting it had been sealed long ago, possibly decades before the fire. When the workers broke through, they descended into a brick-lined chamber, approximately 15 feet square. The air that rushed out was stale and thick with decay. Inside, arranged along the walls, were 37 wooden markers, crude crosses made from scrap lumber. Each cross bore a name carved into the wood, names that matched exactly the list found in the attic. But the markers were not graves. They were memorials, placed there by someone who wanted to remember those who had no proper burial. In the center of the chamber floor was a trap door. When opened, it revealed a shaft descending another 10 feet into the earth. At the bottom, investigators found human remains, not 37 bodies, but fragments, bones scattered and mixed, impossible to separate into individual persons. Forensic examination, crude as it was in 1888, suggested the remains had been there for at least 25 years, possibly longer. Also found in the shaft were shackles, chains, and rusted iron tools, instruments of bondage and punishment from the era of slavery. And on the earthen walls of the shaft, scratched into the dirt by fingernails or primitive implements, were words in various languages, prayers, curses, names, pleas for mercy. One phrase appeared repeatedly, written in English, "We will return." The implication was inescapable. This was a mass grave, hidden beneath the Ashford estate. These were people who had suffered and died in bondage, whose deaths had been covered up, whose very existence had been erased from official records. And someone, either Elizabeth Ashford in her final days or Martha Clemmons herself, had discovered this horror and decided that the dead deserved justice. But what kind of justice requires fire and death? A local historian named Silas Crawford, who examined the site in November 1888, wrote in his personal notes, "I have seen many things in my study of this county's history, but nothing has shaken me like this cellar. It represents not just a crime, but a systemic evil that we as a society participated in and then tried to forget. If Martha Clemmons truly believed she was giving voice to these forgotten souls, can we call her a murderer? Or was she an instrument of something larger, something that we ourselves created through our cruelty and indifference? The discovery of the hidden cellar changed public opinion dramatically. While many still believed Martha had committed murder, others began to see the tragedy in a different light. Perhaps she'd been driven mad by the knowledge of what lay beneath the house. Perhaps she truly believed she was spiritually connected to the victims buried there. Or perhaps something else entirely had happened on the night of October 14th, 1888, something that transcended simple human violence. The sheriff's office closed the case in December 1888, officially ruling the fire as accidental with suspicious circumstances. No warrant was ever issued for Martha's arrest, despite her disappearance. The Thornhill Estate land was sold at auction in 1889 to a timber company. The house was never rebuilt, and the 37 sets of remains found in the hidden cellar were never properly identified, never given individual burials, never returned to any descendants who might have claimed them. They were reinterred in a mass grave at the edge of the property, marked only with a simple stone that read, "Unknown. May God have mercy." But the story was far from over. For decades after the fire, the story of Martha Clemmons and the Thornhill Estate faded into local legend. Children in Wilkes County grew up hearing whispered tales about the housemaid who burned down the mansion, about ghosts that walked the ruins, about strange lights that appeared in the pine forests where the estate once stood. But as the years passed, the details blurred, the facts mingled with fiction, and the truth became increasingly difficult to discern. Then, in the spring of 1953, something happened that brought the case roaring back to life. Professor Leonard Hutchins, a historian from the University of Georgia specializing in post-Civil War Southern history, was conducting research on forgotten African-American communities in rural Georgia. While examining records at the Wilkes County Courthouse, he stumbled upon the Thornhill Estate case files, which had been misfiled and largely forgotten in a basement storage room. Intrigued, Professor Hutchins spent 3 months investigating the case, interviewing elderly residents who remembered hearing about the fire from their parents and grandparents. In July 1953, he published a paper titled The Thornhill Tragedy: Race, Justice, and the Supernatural in Post-Reconstruction, Georgia. The paper attracted significant attention in academic circles, but it was what Professor Hutchins found during his research that truly shocked everyone. While exploring the site of the old estate, by then completely overgrown with vegetation and nearly invisible beneath decades of forest growth, Hutchins discovered a small metal box buried beneath what had once been the foundation of the servants' quarters. Inside was a diary, remarkably well preserved due to the waterproof seal of the yellow box. The diary belonged to Martha Clemmons. The entries were sporadic, written in a neat but hurried hand, and they painted a picture vastly different from the one the 1888 investigation had suggested. The first entry was dated April 1885. "Mrs. Mercer says I must leave her house. She's afraid of me now, afraid of what she saw me do in the cellar. I did not mean to frighten her, but the voices are so loud here, in this town where so many suffered. I hear them calling from beneath the streets, from beneath the old auction blocks and warehouses. They want to be remembered, they want to be free. Mrs. Mercer has written to a family in Wilkes County, people who live on land with a great debt. I will go there. Perhaps there I can help them find peace." Later entries revealed that Martha had not come to the Thornhill Estate by chance. She had known about the hidden graves, about the victims buried beneath the property. How she knew was never explained, but the diary suggested she possessed some form of spiritual sensitivity, what might today be called mediumship. An entry from September 1886. "I found them tonight, 37 souls, trapped beneath the kitchen, unable to move on because they were never mourned, never named, never freed. They speak to me in dreams, they show me how they died. Some from disease, yes, but others were punished for trying to escape, for learning to read, for defending their children. Edmund's father did these things. Edmund knows. The whole family knows. They have always known. But they pretend the past is buried, that what happened here does not matter anymore. How can I make them understand? How can I make them see that the dead do not forget?" The diary entries grew increasingly desperate as the months progressed. Martha wrote about trying to perform rituals to help the spirits find peace, about creating the attic room as a space where she could communicate with them without disturbing the family. She wrote about Elizabeth, Ashford, Edmund's late wife, who had apparently known about the graves and had tried to seal them spiritually before her death. But something had gone wrong. An entry from June 1888. "They are changing. The spirits I tried to help, they are becoming something else. Anger is consuming them. They no longer want peace. They want revenge. They want the Ashford family to pay for what was done to them. I try to calm them, to remind them that Edmund and his children were not the ones who hurt them, but they do not listen. They say the debt passes through blood, that the ones who inherit the land inherit the sins. I am losing control. The door I open to help them is staying open longer each night. Soon, I fear, I will not be able to close it at all." The final entry, dated October 13th, 1888, one day before the fire. "Tonight they will come through. I have fought them for weeks, but I am exhausted. Every night I hold the door closed, and every night they push harder from the other side. Caroline saw what is happening. She understands now. I tried to warn them, tried to tell them to leave this place, but Edmund refuses. He says this is his family's land, and he will not be driven away by superstitious nonsense. He does not understand that this is not superstition, this is consequence. Tomorrow night at midnight, the door will open whether I will it or not. I have prepared myself. I will try one last time to protect this family, even though they do not deserve protection. But if I fail, God forgive me, if I fail, the fire will come. Professor Hutchins' discovery of this diary fundamentally changed the understanding of the Thornhill case. Martha had not been a murderer. She had been trying to prevent the tragedy, not cause it. But the question remained: what exactly happened on the night of October 14th? Did Martha lose control of the spirits she had been communing with? Or did she ultimately choose to let them through, to allow them their vengeance? The answer came from an unexpected source in 1967. An elderly woman named Ruth Pritchard, the granddaughter of Samuel Cooper, the farmhand who had witnessed the strange argument 6 days before the fire, came forward with a letter her grandfather had written shortly before his death in 1942. In the letter, Samuel confessed that he had lied during the original investigation. On the night of the fire, Samuel had not been at his home 3 miles away. He had been sleeping in the barn on the Ashford property, having drunk too much whiskey and deciding it was safer to stay rather than walk home in the dark. He was awakened by screaming around midnight. According to his letter, Samuel crept closer to the house and saw Martha standing in the front yard, her arms raised, her voice calling out in a language he did not recognize. Behind her, the house was beginning to burn, but the fire did not start in the kitchen, as the official report claimed. It started simultaneously in all 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Samuel wrote, "I saw her there, and God help me, I saw them too. Shadows moving around her, dozens of them, flowing from her like smoke and entering the house through the windows. I heard the Ashfords screaming, heard them pounding on their doors, trying to get out, but the shadows held the doors closed. Martha stood there watching, tears streaming down her face, and she kept saying over and over, 'I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but it has to be done.' When the screaming stopped, the shadows flowed back out of the house and into the ground, like water soaking into soil. Martha collapsed. I ran to the road and hid. I never told anyone what I saw because I knew they would think I was mad or drunk or both. But I saw it. I saw what she did, and I saw that she did not want to do it." In 1978, one final piece of evidence emerged: a construction crew demolishing an old house in Augusta, Georgia, the former home of the Mercer family, where Martha had worked before coming to the Ashfords, found a hidden compartment behind a fireplace. Inside was a photograph dated 1884, showing 2 women standing side by side. One was Eleanor Mercer. The other was a young black woman who looked exactly like Martha Clemmons. But written on the back of the photograph, in Eleanor Mercer's handwriting, was a name that was not Martha. Abaney, last of the wise women, may God protect us from her gifts. Research into the name Abaney revealed it was a Yoruba name, meaning "we asked for her," and "she came to us." In certain West African spiritual traditions, it was a title given to women believed to have the ability to communicate with the dead and guide souls to the afterlife. Martha Clemmons, it seemed, had not been her real name. Or perhaps she had taken that name to hide what she truly was, a woman with a gift she could not control, who had tried to bring peace to restless spirits and had instead unleashed their fury upon those who bore the sins of their oppressors. To this day, the site where the Thornhill Estate once stood remains empty. Local residents avoid it, claiming the area feels heavy, and that strange lights are still sometimes seen moving through the trees at night. The mass grave of the 37 unidentified victims, relocated to the county cemetery in 1965, is occasionally visited by people leaving flowers, though no one knows who these visitors are or why they come. And Martha Clemmons, or Abaney, or whatever her true name was never found. Accus. So what really happened on the night of October 14th, 1888? After more than a century of investigation, speculation and discovery, we still don't have a definitive answer. The truth, it seems, died with Martha Clemmons, or was buried with the 37 souls beneath the Thornhill Estate. But we can examine the evidence and draw our own conclusions. Theory 1. Martha was a murderer driven by vengeance. This is the simplest explanation, and the one that was most popular in 1888. Martha Clemmons was a black woman working in the home of a white family in the post-Civil War South. She would have been intimately familiar with the injustices of that era, perhaps even a victim of them herself. When she discovered the hidden graves beneath the Ashford property, evidence of brutal crimes committed during slavery, she decided to take justice into her own hands. She planned the murders carefully. She unlocked the attic, prepared the ritual space to make it appear supernatural. And then, on the night of October 14th, she locked the Ashford family in their rooms and set fire to the house. She survived by fleeing into the fields. The spiritual elements, the diary, the symbols, the voices, were all fabrications designed to deflect blame or create an insanity defense. This theory is neat, logical, and entirely human. No ghosts required, just a woman who had seen too much injustice and decided to become the instrument of retribution. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain how the fire started simultaneously in all 4 bedrooms, as Samuel Cooper claimed to witness. It doesn't explain the testimony of Carolyn and Thomas in the days before the fire, describing Martha as genuinely altered, as if something else was speaking through her. And it doesn't explain the diary entries, which suggest Martha was fighting against the violence, not orchestrating it. Theory 2. Martha was a medium who lost control of forces she did not understand. This theory accepts the supernatural elements as real. Martha possessed genuine spiritual gifts, the ability to communicate with the dead, to sense their presence, to feel their pain. She came to the Thornhill Estate specifically to help the trapped souls beneath the property find peace. But in opening the door between the living and the dead, she unleashed something she could not contain. The spirits, consumed by decades of rage and suffering, refused to be calmed. They wanted revenge, and they were powerful enough to take it. On the night of October 14th, they came through the door Martha had opened and killed the Ashford family themselves. Martha survived because she was not their enemy. She was their liberator, intentional or not. The fire was not set by human hands, but by spiritual force, a purifying flame meant to erase the house that stood above the graves of the forgotten. This theory fits the eyewitness accounts and Martha's own diary entries. It explains the supernatural phenomena reported before the fire, the impossible nature of the fire itself, and Martha's anguished message, "They made me open the door." But it requires belief in forces beyond the material world, and not everyone is willing to make that leap. Theory 3. The truth is somewhere in between. Perhaps Martha did have spiritual sensitivity, did genuinely communicate with something she believed were the souls of the dead. Perhaps she did try to help them. But perhaps, in her desperation or exhaustion or moral conviction, she ultimately chose to let them have their revenge, or carried out that revenge herself, while believing she was being guided by spirits. In this interpretation, the question of real or imagined becomes irrelevant. What matters is that Martha believed she was acting as an agent of justice for those who could not speak for themselves. Whether the spirits were real or whether they were manifestations of her own conscience and trauma, the result was the same. 4 people died, 37 names were remembered, and a debt, real or symbolic, was paid in blood and fire. The Ashford family may not have personally committed the crimes against those buried beneath their property, but they lived on that land, prospered from its history, and chose to forget the suffering that had soaked into its soil. In Martha's mind, or in the minds of the spirits speaking through her, that made them complicit. Was it justice? Was it murder? Or was it something Beyond either category, a moment when the past reached forward to claim the present, when history refused to stay buried. We may never know. To this day, no one knows the full truth of what happened at the Thornhill Estate. Martha Clemmons was never found. No body was ever recovered. Some believe she escaped and lived out her life under a different name in another state. Others believe she died in the woods, succumbing to her injuries or her guilt. And some believe she is still out there, still wandering, still carrying the weight of 37 souls who asked her to set them free. The ruins of the estate are gone now, reclaimed by forest and time. But if you visit Wilkes County, Georgia, and ask the older residents about the Thornhill fire, they will tell you the same thing. Stay away from those woods at night. Don't go near the place where the house once stood. Because sometimes on October 14th, people still see a woman standing in the clearing, her arms raised, her voice calling out to something no one else can see. And sometimes they say the air smells like smoke. Before we go, I want to hear from you, our haunted community. What do you believe happened that night? Was Martha a victim, a murderer, or something else entirely? Do you think the supernatural elements were real, or were they products of guilt and trauma? Drop your theories in the comments below. We read every single one, and your insights often shed new light on these dark histories. If you enjoyed this journey into one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, please subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We explore forgotten cases, hidden histories, and the darkest corners of the past every week. Share this video with someone who loves true crime and historical mysteries, and join our growing community of people who believe that the past should never be forgotten, no matter how dark it might be. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, the past is never truly buried. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to return.